Alright, welcome everyone to something completely different. I've just come off editing a Dominions 5 Nation Guide and realised, as I sometimes did, that I made a slew of mistakes that require correction. So I've decided to shelve that for another night and just record something to go up tonight, and that's me playing a game that I really never expected to play, let alone play on the channel, but I've kind of fallen in love with a little bit, which is HighFleet Deus in Nobis. This is, at first glance, an arcadey, diesel punk futuristic aerial combat game, which is completely contrary to most of the things that you would normally associate with my channel, but I've really been enjoying it for two reasons. The first is it's got a surprisingly deep map sort of operational and tactical strategy layer. That is, it comes down to a lot more than your ability to actually handle the combat mode. The second thing is that this game has nukes, real nukes, lots of nukes, and managing them is an incredibly difficult and complicated part of the game, so much so that I played this game, and for the first time I can remember playing a video game recently, I lost. I lost badly. Like, I made some progress and then I got my ass handed to me and died. So I thought, why not, for a change, play something I'm terrible at, blow off some steam. This game's got a relatively short campaign, so I figured it's best I can probably cover it in an episode or two and show off something a little bit different before I get my next Nation Guides back up and start catching up on my sponsored video count. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch into a new campaign as I explain the concept of this game. I'm going to skip the prologue because I imagine there's a lot of channels out there that have covered this who cover the prologue. Do I want to... You know what? I'll cover the prologue briefly, and we'll go from there. But I want to jump into the main game pretty quickly. So, the setting. Let's start with the lore. This is a post-apocalyptic Earth, so much so that they don't even really call it Earth anymore. It's clear that sometime in the past there was a great apocalypse, there was a nuclear war, so most technology has passed into memory, and now most nations carry on their conflicts using these giant flying aerial cruisers powered by VTOL engines. I know, it doesn't make a huge amount of sense, but it's very thematic once you get in. You play as the Grand Duke, so the heir to the throne of a empire which can be best described as having some sort of Russian crossed with almost Middle Eastern Persian identity. You've got the Romanov-style double-headed eagle as your sigil. You are the Saidi family, and what has happened is you are part of an expedition that was sent to quell basically a rebellion in a puppet state that had previously been annexed into your empire. So you're going to go meet with a local a prince who is cooperating with you. So here's the introduction. The land you're occupying or going into, by the way, is called Gerat. So the Great Desert of Gerat, ancient kingdom, ruled over this land long ago until it was torn apart by strife and internecine war. The last king of Gerat swore allegiance to the Romani Empire, which you are the heir of. This land seems to be doomed to bear the burden of war for all time. 7 years ago, an imperial official, the Lord Governor of Kiva, overthrew the king and declared rebellion against the emperor's rule. So this area has been in a rebellion against the crown for about 7 years, and it's got a very strong Middle Eastern or Central Asiatic vibe, depending on what sort of scene you're in. Now our turn has come. We have come to Gerat to end this once and for all. So, wake up. Tarkan. Tarkan is a word for commander in this lore. Long journey is finally ahead of us. Everyone is eager to hear the order to land. And here we are at the map layer. And this has got to be one of the most engaging UIs I have ever seen in a game. Almost all of these controls do something. They're not for display. This is how you pick up and intercept radio signals over here, by picking up a handset and literally decoding them. Communication with allies is handled through an actual intercom. When you, later on, you will find use for an actual ruler, a pencil with which you can mark things on the map, put that away, a device with which you can measure distances, represented by a ruler. All of this is functional. This is your ship selection, your thrust, and the all-important missile control and selection system is up here. This is a fantastically engaging UI, and it's a great strength of the game. Most of the strategic management happens in this screen here. So this is our task force here. It's made up of these four flying, let's call them airships for want of a better word. This is a city, so we will fly to that location by powering up our thrust. I'll hold shift to I'll unpause by hitting spacebar, and I can speed up time by holding shift. And we'll go there and we will land. Open the hatch to land. You don't have to physically land any of your stuff normally unless you want a repair bonus, but if you do, you have to physically land the ship. So these are what the flying cruisers look like. This is a light sort of Corvette style. You'll see it as it breaks through the clouds here. And the goal here is to land without causing too much destruction to yourself. As you can see, the basic theme is blocky armoured vessels with primary armaments made up of missiles and mostly guns, and these VTOL engines, and using them as the primary tool of power projection. Very interesting, with the theory being that with most areas being desolate wastes, flying vehicles like this are actually kind of handy. So we come down, and this is an example of a story interaction. So you meet this guy. This is a prince of the local nobility, essentially. There are conversation choices. They impact your worldview, which is your reputation and your opinion in both virtues, so order, force, wealth, and kindness, and then also whether you're more aligned with your empire or the locals, and then whether you have a alignment with fear or local religions. It tracks your allies and how loyal they are to you, and the morale of your crew. All of those are almost semi-RPG-esque elements that attract, which is odd for what is essentially a roguelike game, i.e. you lose many times. So we'll introduce ourselves. This is a plus opinion if you pick the right one. Perhaps they will. The Gathering, by the way, are the primary opponents of the game. So the Gathering of the Great Houses. So the idea is here is that many of the noble families that served under your father or sworn to your father have rebelled, and they're the ones that are causing most of the problem. Your people have fought bravely, so we get more opinion from him, and you can see that's buying us stars. We'll be honest, we'll say that if we win, we'll re-annex the area. Great, so he's saying he'll help us meet with the generals that are operating in the area, and we'll combine our forces. There we are. Okay, in the city, so when you land in a city, you purchase special equipment, fuel, and at the shipyard separately, you buy actual components. Once we get into the main game, I'll talk about components a little bit more. But for the most part, managing your economic resources is immensely important in this game. You have a limited supply of money, and at least for the first 2/3 of the game, money and resource management is immensely important. But I won't spoil too much about that just yet. I'll wait a little bit before I talk about that. So there we are. So we've executed our order, which was to land in Eli. We'll ask our second in command why we were sent. You can stop and read this if you need to, but I figure, let me just delete all the marks that I made on the map because they're not necessary. Put the rubber back. All good. So we need to head to Shimri. To wait that, we've got to wait till we refuel. So we'll speed up time, take on all of our fuel. What do you think of this entire expedition? Father asked you to help me out. Great. I'm skipping through these conversation options because it's the prologue, and prologue conversation options don't have impact on the main game, obviously, so that you can skip it later on. So, we'll head to the next city. Whenever you head to a city, it's usually got garrison forces, and when you arrive, you encounter the tactical combat of the game. So here's the tactical combat. You're allowed to send in one ship at a time, but at any point you can retreat and send the next one in. So it's tag team. You're up against all of the enemy forces at once. This sounds immensely unfair, but I kind of understand why the game designers did it this way. It means you can focus on controlling one vessel at a time, because the battles are, as you're about to see, real-time and semi-arcadey. So this is the battle. These are the battle format. Aiming is you've done with the mouse. WASD controls on maneuvering the ship, while the mouse handles actually aiming the guns. Our opponents here are just small little corvettes. There's a pretty comprehensive damage model involved here. Yes, I know retreat is available. And you can see in the bottom left and... Ooh, we're taking some damage there. And bottom left and bottom right of the screen that whichever opponent you're targeting, their schematic and your damage schematic pop up at the same time. In the top left, you'll see my ammunition belt literally physically loading to show how much ammunition I've got in my guns at any given time. We're going to try and eliminate that guy there, he's been destroyed, fantastic. Shift to trigger the afterburners, which you can do briefly without blowing up your engines, to dodge his volleys. By the way, I'm not very good at this part of the game. I'm showing this off not because I normally like shooty arcadey games, but because the strategy layer is so interesting to me. So maybe I don't expect you to show every battle. But anyway, there we are. We've gunned down some local yokel militia in their light corvettes. Victory, fantastic. So now we can land. Because it's the prologue, it'll force us to land something. Once you get into the main game, you're not required to land anything. So I'm just going to do a little suicide burn down here to save time. Drop down to about 500. Start reverse burning. Burn off some speed. Probably could have dropped even further. Drop right down. Those markers on the ground, by the way, are the repair bonus of landing in that spot. So 5 is a 5% repair bonus.
Landing complete.
Landed. Great, so we have an opportunity to replenish our stuff, so we will buy a full load of fuel, which is often your greatest expense. Special ammunition types all over the place. It's the prologue, we don't get to keep any of this, but you can pay often quite large amounts of money. You'll see huge amounts of money to buy limited amounts of very powerful special ammunition or ordnance for light aircraft, because light aircraft are a separate auxiliary part of this game. So, for example, that put 20 100 kilo general purpose bombs into my special weapon storage. In the shipworks, as the tutorial is explaining, you have this very comprehensive ship design layer. You can modify ships during the campaign, like this, by buying components, adding them, adjusting them. All of these things come off, click off. Huge number of concerns, including like mass ratio, you need ammunition, you have radar and IR cross sections, fuel consumption rates, ranges, speeds, it all matters. You need a whole bunch of ELINT components, electronic intelligence components matter as well. So we'll just repair for now. And then outside of the campaign, you can freely design ships. And when you start a new campaign, because it's a points buy sort of system, the game will automatically cost the ships that you design. And if you want to, you can take them into the campaign. I'm increasingly coming to the view that designing ships and then taking them into the campaign is probably better than using the stock designs. And stock design only is probably going to be a challenge mode. But anyway, we'll do that. What would normally happen here, by the way, is a whole bunch of components at different shipyards would be available for purchase, and your stockpile of equipment would be held here. So there we are, we're refitting. Now we just have to refuel and we can get to the next location, which will be Karlu. I'm just speeding through because I want to get to the main game. So we've basically refueled, off we go. And here we'll deploy again. You'll notice I'm not sending in my heavier ships. I'm doing that because it's easier to dodge in the smaller stuff, and I don't find the extra armor and protection of the Wanderer worth sending it in compared to these little corvettes. So I'm going to go into battle in a little corvette. I have a missile, so I'll show that off. Missiles are expensive, but they are highly damaging. And as you can see, that's one target just eliminated. But that cost me I think 600 gold from memory for an R5 Zenit. And try and dodge this missile and that stuff, and try and make sure that when our opponents launch ordnance at us... Ouch. Okay, I think he's going down. Now, ground vehicles are in the game, but they automatically surrender if you destroy all the air forces for some reason. So while these ground vehicles are launching missiles at me, you'll see the light is already fading because I've won the battle, and they'll automatically surrender. There is a promotion system for individual air vehicles with pickable promotions. I'm going to go with Veteran Gunner. Not that it matters, because you'll lose these after the prologue. So yeah, each individual ship has its own identity, and because the theme of the campaign is managing limited resources in order to accomplish your objectives, you'll actually start to appreciate the fact that your combat ships can gather up those benefits. But as I'll hopefully get to show you in this video, combat assets alone are probably just going to get you killed. So here we are. We've almost finished the prologue, which I have sped through. This is the conversation mechanic, so where you need to convince people to join you. So I just generally like to be awesome about the Romani Empire and just grab as many world viewpoints as I possibly can. Let's give him a present. So presents get you extra turns in order to make speech options. Hard to know what this guy likes. So he's afraid of us, so when we do that sort of implied threat, he actually gets plus opinion, which is good. And we'll end the talks. Remembering we're going to lose, you just get him automatically at a moderate level of opinion once the prologue is over. So let's buy up our fuel. Special equipment doesn't matter. Let's repair our ship just out of good habit. He's joined us in the Gladiator, which is a larger attack frigate sort of combat ship. These are corvettes. This is a frigate. Wanderer is also an attack frigate. This big thing in the middle, by the way, is a fuel tank. This thing uses liquefied gas to power their engines. So as you can imagine, if that thing takes a hit, so armor plates, if a round gets through the armor plate and punctures your fuel tanks, you're going to have a bad time. Designs like the Gladiator tend to armor the fuel tanks, as you can see, and conceal them inside the vessel a little bit more. Although the Gladiator still has some obvious design flaws. So, the Admiral likes us more because we've done our job. So we're refueling. He wants us to go take the last city of the prologue. Oh, the second last city, I think. Okay, so I'll probably just skip this battle quickly. Okay, that battle is done. Admiral's congratulating us on this position. And I'm going to suck up to the Admiral because I want him to like us. And I'm going to say, hey, he doesn't have to give us as many resources as he said he thought of, again, just to suck up to the Admiral. Okay, so now we're going to show off the radio interception mechanic. So this minigame is actually surprisingly important when you think about it, and I'll illustrate why. So basic system is you pick a radio band once you're intercepting a signal, and then you find the exact frequency, and then you tune to the radio direction. Now, this is not just a minigame that's designed to make life difficult. The direction shows you where on the map, or the line from which that signal is coming. You then intercept a message. So we'll arrive approximately 9 hours, speed 150, heading southwest, route Hamat wire weather. Can you supply turbine oil? Okay, great. So the route is via Hamat, and they'll be arriving in 9 hours. And we know that they're currently up north. So this is a signal from a strike group. There are 3 radio bands. They usually represent the 3 different sources of potential transmission. Things that you will get transmission from are enemy convoys, which you can intercept, so transport ships, which you can plunder in order to get the resources you need to keep going. Strike groups are groups of badass enemy main combat units, so like the equivalent of real-world surface action groups and carrier battle groups. Serious things that will mess you up, and if they discover and intercept you, you're in for a really difficult fight. So evading them by intercepting their transmissions, determining where they are, where they're likely to be going, even once their messages become coded, and then evading them and their radars and their air groups actually becomes a significant part of the game if you don't want to die. So I'm going to say they're going to Hamat. We're going to evade them. So if they're going to Hamat, we're instead going to go to Kushan and then take from behind them. This thing here is our radar, by the way. If we can detect them on that, we'll pick them up. We also have IR search. These are all only present in a unit if you have a module on your ship that possesses them. So only if you have radar in a group can you see things, because you can split your group up into multiple components. So we have a ship that has radar. It's the cruiser here, I believe. So we have radar. We have an IR search module. The reason you might have IR search, and I'll show this all off later, is if you decide to turn off your radar, then you still have, so people can't detect your radar, which they can. just like in real life, radar emissions are detectable, and there are certain weapons that will zone in on radar emissions. You can still use passive IR scans, but at a lower range. This is also your radar warning detector over here. So if enemies are pulsing you with radar, you'll get an approximate signal of both the distance away that radar signal is and the bearing from which that radar goes. Finally, there's a jammer here. We'll talk about that later. This deals with when you're under long-range attacks for things like cruise missiles and their radar guide. They're radar guided. You can jam them, but jamming has its own problems. But I find this an incredibly important tool. If everything goes wrong, this thing can save you from being pounded down by cruise missiles. Awesome. So we'll go to Kushan. Oh, okay, we have to repair first. It's fine, so we'll wait a couple of hours. I'm probably going to take off now because we were told that force was going by a Hamad and had an ETA of 9 hours. So we're going to go now, even though we're not fully repaired. I'll probably skip this battle as well once Piotr explains this mechanic. So you can split your force up, and often you'll want to do that. An enemy garrison starts detecting you at a certain radius. Past that point, they build up to the point where they can send a signal to a strike group saying where you are, what your force composition is, etc. Unless you surprise them. To surprise them, you want to send ahead a small number of fast ships, which means you then get a chance to destroy them before they can send a signal. The gamble there, however, is small fast ships aren't generally as good in combat as your heavy combat units, so you have to sort of guess and trade off the risk of going into battle, in this case just with 2 little attack units, without being able to go in with your main force in exchange for not having the enemy strike group discover you're here. Now in this case, obviously, prologue, they're not going to brutalize us too much. Turns out there's actually just 2 corvettes here, and sending in the light units is fine. We're going in with our gladiator. I'll show it off briefly, and then we're probably going to skip. He looks like he's taken some damage to one of his engines. There we are, that looks like a major secondary explosion. I love the damage model in this game, like there's a lot of details going on. Oh, that guy looks like he's got a mixture of rockets and Sea-Whiz guns, which are more designed for stopping missiles and airplanes than other airships. So, bang goes he. Awesome. So that's Kushan. We'll have to land anyway. I will come back once we're at the next story progression. Okay, so we're back. So news from home. So news from home is that we're doing okay against the rebels back in the homeland, but it's going to take a while to drive them off. So we've landed here. I'm just going to get some fuel because we'll need that to reach which is the final objective of the prologue. And if you skip the prologue, you basically start from So you refuel. By now the strike force is probably down here at Melka, but you can't tell, not without any resources down there to go check. So situational awareness, as you're probably gathering, is a really big part of the game. I'm going to tell him that I would happily ask for help and then proceed to not do it. Get close. And then just pretending this is a real battle, we're going to split off all of our fast ships, send them ahead of our cruiser and the Wanderer. And this is a major battle to end the prologue on, so I will do my best and try not to embarrass myself so that we can actually get to the bit of the game that I'm excited to talk about, which is, of course, the strategy layer and the ship buy system and how a campaign works. And I took a missile there, which is a bit embarrassing, but like I said, I'm not very good at this game. People are probably going to watch and go, wow. Also, the stock ship doesn't really support the style of fighting that I'm a fan of, which I will again show off once we enter the main game and I get to buy my vessel. You do get a warning when a ship is about to fire, by the way. I was trying to be fancy there, so let's pop some flares to dodge that other missile that's coming down. He's destroyed. Pop flares again. I'm going to retreat with the Gladiator at this point. because it's taken a heck of a lot of damage. I'm presenting my mostly undamaged right side at the moment. And I'm going to fly to the right-hand side of the map to trigger retreat. And now I've come in as the Corvette, so the next ship on my list. And you get to compare that list to decide what order your ships come in. Oof, that hurt. It's been a long time since I drove something as small as a Corvette, because I've just, like I said, I've just come off a campaign which I lost. It's telling me to abandon ship, but there is no way I'm doing that. I still have guns, I still have engines. I now probably have fewer of those than I did a moment ago. This is awesome. There we are. Okay, they've destroyed that Navarone. I've never lost a ship in the prologue before, but you know, when you're recording, things are just different. We should probably destroy the damaged smaller ships at this point. Okay, so that's one smaller ship off. Those special coloured rounds he's firing, by the way, are special ammunition. They're proximity detonator rounds. So you can see they detonate and become shotgun bursts when they're close. And the enemy fires crap tons of them because they apparently have an unlimited military budget, whereas you will afford very few because they are expensive luxuries. I'm going to get underneath him. Extinguisher and the flares. Probably going to have to retreat in a second. Cool. Next ship. Flares. Way too many missiles. Probably shouldn't have been so fast to retreat the Gladiator, because without those AK-100 guns, I'm actually struggling to put these more heavily armoured units down. And bang! I think I lost. Fantastic. That's awesome. That's a great way. I'm going to repeat this until I win. You know what? Let's see me embarrass myself on camera one more time. One kill, flares. Okay, that's another one destroyed. Suddenly making this look a little bit easier. This is the equivalent of a boss battle, by the way. You don't normally encounter forces this large unless you're dealing with a fleet base or a enemy strike group, and you want to avoid enemy strike groups insofar as is possible. Okay, he's destroyed. Flares to throw off those missiles. Load a full clip. Getting close to this guy and just empty the clip. And try and detonate his fuel. There we are. Nice good fuel detonation there. I think there's now 2 left, and we've taken a lot less damage this time. You notice I haven't used my missiles because I don't tend to use missiles in the campaign, and as a result have no habit of using them. Okay, we're going to go in close. Got him. Mean to retreat there, but that's okay. He's very heavily damaged at this point. So missile launched. Kill confirmed. Great. Okay. So let's pretend that happened the first time and that everything was fine. Promoted the gladiator. Life is good. Doesn't matter. I'll land and trigger the end of the prologue. Okay, story events. We come into everyone's really happy. Everyone's celebrating. And then you have your oh shit moment. By order of High Command, remain in and wait for further instructions. Been ordered to return to point of origin. No explanation provided. So that comes from Admiral Sokolov. So on the morning of the 6th day, the observation station reported a large vessel approaching from the south. It was a lone ship approaching slowly. Hope began to spread. Perhaps it was one of Skobelev's vessels. When it got close enough, we recognized it the Imperial cruiser Sevastopol. So the Sevastopol isn't messing around. It's a huge flying, it's a combination tanker support ship, but it does have some pretty significant armaments on it as well. Unfortunately, as everyone starts to unload, you've got a mixture of locals and a whole bunch of wounded members of our navy. And it turns out the capital of the Empire had suffered a nuclear strike 4 days ago. Sayyidi's stronghold burned down in an instant, reducing it to a smouldering desert of radioactive waste. What remains of the Imperial fleet is in disarray, trying desperately to fight off the Gathering, so the opposing enemy in the Civil War, their advancing forces. We were at a loss for words, we didn't know what to do. Most of us wanted to head to the capital, knowing the war was already as good as lost, because nukes do that. When your capital gets nuked, in a post-apocalyptic setting, it's kind of bad. So everyone gets together and has a discussion, and the nomination here is that you should actually continue onwards to take the capital in the area that you are invading, rather than going home. So it pains me to say this, but I'm convinced the war in the south is already lost. Returning to the motherland will spell certain doom for us all. So what do you propose, Pyotr? The rebel fleet is currently engaged in heavy conflict in the south. Now is the time to mount an offensive in the north and take Khiva by force. I have reason to believe that our intel on the reactor. So the idea, the hinge of this story, is the city of Khiva, which you are trying to take, has one of the very few known intact nuclear reactors in the known world. It's not expressed where exactly the other two are, but there are two known to exist, and apparently Khiva has the third, so it's a valuable piece of technology. So Pyotr's proposal is that you take advantage of the fact that most of the enemies are off fighting your dad and your homeland. You take Khiva, and then you bargain for a peace using basically holding the reactor ransom. So there's some argument, and then eventually there's a decision that you will lead. So you are the Grand Duke, the sole legitimate heir, so you will lead what remains of the Romani fleet into battle. The crew are behind you, so you get promoted, title card drops, and you get told that you are leading an offensive into Khiva. So the objective of the campaign we'll cover in a moment, but it all starts with picking your ship lineup. You have a certain amount of cash. I got a little bit more than normal. You get a bonus in New Game Plus mode for taking certain forces. These are mostly stock ships, but there's 2 that I modified myself, and there are 3, I think, that I got from someone who was posting design on the Steam Workshop. I really liked the designs and wanted to use them rather than duplicating them myself. So you have a certain amount of money, and you got to buy vessels. And there's actually a lot going on here. There are red ships, which are the ones that are designed for combat, that tactical combat mode you've seen so far, but you need everything else. There are aircraft carriers that carry aircraft which you can deploy on the strategic map and use to launch strikes on locations or do reconnaissance. I find their reconnaissance function really important. Also matters is the fact that they've got interceptor capability, where they can destroy incoming cruise missiles. You've got a whole bunch of strategic missile carriers. The Yars Mark II and Yars Mark I are stock. I've designed the Yars Mark III, which I'll talk about in a moment. And of course you have aircraft that carry nuclear missiles of various sorts. So the Vega here is a nuclear missile carrier, costs 101,000, so almost all your money, but it's carrying, if you look at the equipment down the bottom there, 6 A100N nuclear-tipped warheads. Nukes are as powerful as you'd expect them to be, or maybe a little bit weaker than you expect them to be, but bloody strong, but there are reasons not to use them in the campaign. Namely, the moment you shoot a nuke, the other guys decide they can shoot nukes as well because you've broken the sort of moratorium, and they have a lot more nukes than you are. So you've got to be really certain before you start popping off nuclear warheads. There are early warning ships, so aircraft that carry radar systems, ELINT systems, thermal sensors, jammers, the full range of different ELINT equipment that you might have if you want to add that sort of intelligence to your squadron. By default, you have most of that on your flagship, but you do not have jammers, which is why I normally take, and this is maybe controversial, I've got an aircraft carrier here with an extended flight deck and some jammers, which I call the Longbow ECM. So this is, my modifications are, I've stripped all the Sea-Whiz guns off the Longbow, I've added a little more flight deck, which means she's pretty ungainly in tactical combat, but you should never take your carriers into tactical combat, and I managed to flit 2 more heavy fighters and 2 jamming modules onto that. So this aircraft carrier, it's a massive fuel hog, it's got no tactical combat value, but it adds a lot to my overall force. I'm also going to take, I recommend, one of the heaviest attack frigates you can find. So you need something to actually win all of those little surprise tactical battles. And the idea here is there's lots of hybrid ships, right? And you could roll into every battle with your massive capital ship, but it's got all these expensive radars and tanks and pieces of equipment all over it, and those tend to get shot up. Even if the armor protects the ship itself, you tend to lose a lot of very expensive equipment, plus it can't surprise anybody. So I don't like hybrids. I don't like things like the Gepard and the Wanderer. So the Gepard, for example, is an air superiority plus ELINT vessel. It's got radars and stuff. I'm sort of like, no, I would rather a dedicated combat ship. And then between missile carriers and gunships, I don't like missile ships because the missiles themselves are vulnerable and they're expensive to keep fed, so I tend to pass on things like the Paladin. And I don't like really weak shit, like the Rook, because you tend to lose them, and if you can only have one aircraft in battle at the same time, you want it to have a little bit of mass at least. So the Gladiator, things like the Gladiator are my nomination for what you would normally take. I'm going to use the Tigon 3, which is a vessel that was designed by someone on Steam, but to be honest, I'd probably build something similar. What this is a ship which takes the philosophy of being very heavily armored in one direction, so it's got a lot of top armor, and then a main battery, and a bunch of maneuverability. So this thing has basically no protection on the bottom, a little bit of protection on the side, and very heavy protection on the top, which means that if you present your opponent one direction, so if you get underneath them, you're heavily protected and can battle. I also designed this horrific thing called the Offsider, which is a asymmetrical and thus very hard to fly aircraft with all of its protection on the right-hand side and the bottom and no protection on the left, and it mounts an anti-capital, the biggest gun in the game on the smallest possible platform, but it's not actually that good a deal, so we're not going to take it this time. Plus, I'd like to use more base ships to show things off. We'll take a tanker. This is a publicly posted thing. It is literally just the motors flapped to the biggest fuel tanks you can find. That'll extend the range of any force it goes with. I like to have a lot of missile tubes with me as well. The Yars Mark III is my version of the Mark II. I've stripped all the conventional cruise missiles out of it, so it's got 2 empty tubes and 2 A100N nukes in it. 2 tubes that you can fill with missiles that you find along the way. I don't like conventional cruise missiles. I don't think they're value for money. They're very good for your opponents, but for you, with your limited resources, I don't like them as much. I've also got this thing here that I downloaded called a Shicaretto, but I often build ships like this in the campaign as well. It's basically just a passive detection suite on the smallest possible platform, so the stealthiest possible thing with the most sensors possible, designed to give you situational awareness. This thing is not particularly useful in the early campaign, but is useful later on. So this gives me 38,000 left over, with which I can either take a Shicaretto, or I could take maybe another tanker, or I could just take the extra combat into battle. This thing says that it recommends you have 2,000 range in the campaign. I reckon ignore this. If you're above 1500, I reckon you're fine, and you could probably make do with even less. So we'll take one Shikaredo just as a scout, but to be honest, the aircraft are going to be doing most of the scouting for me. So that's that. Now, you can go whichever way you want. Don't let this be dominate. There's also really good arguments in favor of taking, for example, I could drop the Shikaredo and take an extra Tigon, so that you have a little more tactical combat capability. This has dropped us to 1500 range and very little cash, though. You know what? I'm probably going to take the... I'll take the Shikaredo and the Tigon, and I'll wish that I had more of these later on. But all's fair in love and war. Let's go. So we talked to the ally who arrived on board the Sevastopol. He gives us a little pot, which we can give as a gift to the first person that we encounter. But here we have the map. Okay, so this is the grand map, and it's a long way to your target. Our objective is to capture the Kiva reactor. The city of Kiva is in the northern reaches of Gerat. It's protected by the governor's own squadron. You'll need to force them out of the city. It is imperative the reactor remains completely intact, which means a nuclear strike against Kiva is not an option. So of all the cities on the map, you cannot nuke Kiva, you will lose the game. However, we will face far worse threats to the success of this operation before we reach Kiva. According to our intel, there are 5 gathering strike groups equipped with nuclear weapons somewhere in Gerat. They also have conventional cruise missiles, which he doesn't mention, but are probably more important because they will shoot all of those suckers at you, even if you never fire cruise missiles first. There's no problem with them using their conventional ordnance, it's just nukes where the AI has a no first use policy. Strike group moves city to city on average once a day. So once per day, they'll run a patrol route between different cities. If the enemy spots us and has time to report it, so if you go inside the range of detection and you're picked up, strike groups will try and get close, and then they'll fire missiles. So M on the map is a conventional cruise missile. You need to steer clear of them and track their movements at all times, so radio intercepts and things like that are how you track those strike groups. By capturing one of their comms arrays, you can intercept comms and find out where the strike groups are at that given time. They also have aircraft carrier groups, missile carrier groups, all of which are a big threat to your force. Aircraft carriers have a combat radius of about 2,000 kilometers for one-way strikes using their aircraft, I think. Lastly, there are also transport ships moving to and fro between cities. They are hardly if ever escorted, and if you pick them up, you can sell them for significant amounts of money, which you will need to buy your fuel, to hire mercenaries, to pay for equipment, all of the above. So, the basic premise of the game is you move city to city, quickly and quietly as possible, probably, trying to get your way, picking up generals, so rogue generals who are aligned with your cause along the way, and you need to move north and take Kiva. The reason I lost this game is I assumed that this phase of the game, up to taking Kiva, is all there is. I will not spoil more than this. If I do more videos and we get to Kiva, which doesn't take too long if everything goes well, there's actually more to the game than everything up to this point, and that's when I lost. So I managed to get to Kiva the first time, but after that everything went pear-shaped. So, let's do a little bit of an interaction just to show how this works. Every location has a special ability. So like this one has a shipyard, faster repairs. Kush has a fuel depot, so cheaper fuel. You want to do most of your refueling at places that have cheaper fuel because fuel is one of your major expenses. So, and we also have a Tarkan somewhere far east of which to me means either Surt or Kiryath. So I'm thinking what we're going to do is we're going to send the main force up towards Kush, and we're going to disconnect. This is where I wish I had a second combat ship, but I don't. I was thinking we were going to disconnect a ship and send them to Surt, so instead we're going to go Surt first. So we'll take off, we'll go intercepting a radio signal right off the bat, so let's pick up where it is. Frequency there, it is coming from... Okay, so it's probably coming from Surt. Expect in 8 hours, speed northwest. Okay, So that looks like a message from a transport aircraft that is traveling from Cert to Kush. So I'm going to divert to Kush, and then as soon as I can, with range, I'm going to take my fast tank. Yeah, I can do it now. I'm going to take my fast tanker and my combat ship, and I'm going to Kush. I'm going to try and intercept that transport vessel. I don't have a radar contact yet. That's the maximum point of my radar range, so it makes sense that there's no contact. But to try and find these guys, I'm going to launch a couple of aircraft, just with cannon, and try and get an eye and confirm, is there a transport ship moving between Cert and Kush? So these LA-29s have a small visual detection radius, but they're also hard for the enemy. Okay, there we are. Okay, so that looks like speed 107, so that's a transport aircraft. It is heading towards Kush as planned, so I'm going to recall the carrier aircraft at this point. And this is one of the reasons why I like having a carrier. So we're going to take Kush first before the transports get there, and then we're going to intercept the transports at the point where they're close to arriving. So we're going to send the Tigon in first and hope that the tanker doesn't get deployed, because the tanker has no weapons and no armor, and if it takes a bullet, it will probably explode. We've got 3 enemies, and here we've got a vessel which is pretty much designed to fight low. So we're going to go low altitude and we're going to get underneath these guys. Other than that, we've got 4 AK-100 cannon, so similar armament to the stock Gladiator. And we also have a bit of armor on our left and right, so we're fine fighting left, right, or things that are above us, while also being fairly maneuverable. Okay, so one of them has taken damage. The reason you like armor is because armor is really cheap to repair, unlike other components. Great. Decent amount, so we've got basically a standard amount of firepower on an armored maneuverable package which is designed to combat from one direction. When you win a battle, you have to choose what you're going to salvage first. I'm going to start with the fuel tanks. Are you going to send your rescue team in to try and capture electronic intelligence, because everything's burning down in the fire? I'm choosing to secure the fuel tanks first, and then I could disassemble the hull, but I'm going to take the time to put protective suits on. It probably means I'm going to miss the chance. Oh, I got it just in time. Speed up time. And this basically is deciding what you're salvaging before the whole place burns down. So I managed to salvage some fuel and some repair components. I don't feel the need to land. So, a doyen of the city is a seneschal, deeply devoted to his majesty. He is overjoyed to see the Grand Duke pay a visit to his land. Doyen cordially invites, makes it very clear your lame companions are not welcome. I will accept. So basically what I've said is I've basically offended the locals, but I've built up my cred among the Romani loyalists, and I've gotten myself a bunch of extra ships. We will, because the fuel storage, good place to start refueling. And in terms of ordnance, I'm seeing I basically only want to buy aircraft ordnance. So I will buy some 250 kilogram general purpose aircraft bombs and a small number of 122mm rockets. I don't really like 122 rockets, but we'll get a couple. It's the 250 kilo bombs that we're probably going to end up using. But don't go overboard. Buying too much special ammunition is a fast way to bankrupt yourself. So we picked up 2 Jaguars, which is great. They can probably operate as their own force. That force will now refuel, and we're going to eventually get visual contact on a transport coming in.
Attention, new target on the radar.
Okay. I'll skip the tutorial and explain it myself. So we got a radar contact. The radar doesn't just put something on your map, not its first. You can see here that it's giving you an actual return. The return is this line. The target is probably at the center of that line. If you look at the map, the degrees on the radar display are matched here. So the outer edge of the radar display means your target is probably about here right now. So I'll just put that pencil away, but that's just to illustrate how you read this radar display. Now, you can narrow your radar in. If you want to care only about a particular area, you turn it on sector search, use this to adjust its bearing. This button here means you do one sweep of the radar, so equivalent to one 360-degree sweep, and then the radar is off, which means your radar cannot be detected. For now, we'll do another sweep, and yep, it looks like it's closing in, so it's now at past 30, so it's now on its way. It's almost in Kush at this point. Okay, so we've now got a visual contact. So we will send just the Tigon out, send it with the tanker just in case they run, to intercept this transport. He has sent a warning message, which always happens, unfortunately. It's a cost of doing business with transport ships. So here we are. We've got a prize ship and escorts. You don't want to destroy the prize ship because it will surrender if you destroy its escorts. So we're going to get low. Took a lot of damage there, but at least, well, a lot of hits, but I took it on the super heavily armoured top end of the ship. Whereas these guys are not heavily protected on the outside. So one of the reasons why I like fighting from the bottom of the map is that most of the base designs don't have very good underside protection. So if you have good topside protection and come at them from their underside, you're likely to get sort of the soft underbelly, so to speak. Okay, I think we took some damage to some valuable components there, mainly our antenna, but we captured the transport. So we'll secure the fuel tanks. And do I want to risk it? I'm going to risk crew casualties to dismantle them a lot, which is a piece of equipment. That's how you salvage it. And then the main force, what's my range on this? Oh great, I have heaps of range. So I could go straight to Cert with these guys while the main force refuels. And in fact, I may do that. Riot danger just means you have a captured ship in tow. And if you keep that up for too long, eventually that crew may decide to cause problems. So the main force will refuel at the fuel depot. And while they're doing this force, we'll hit Cert. Now the enemy can't be surprised because a warning signal got sent.
The enemy has been destroyed.
Luckily the local garrison is pretty weak, so if I get underside of this little corvette, they have virtually no protection. There you go. The early game does feature some opponents like that are just these little local defense pods, very easy to take down. So we will search the crew cabins first, get a gift. We will dismantle this thing for 3,000 money. Then we will secure the ammunition, the fuel tanks, and we've sold the captured ship for $15,000. So we've got a whole bunch of fuel. We're refueling. We won't land because we probably don't need to. Don't see a Tarkan here, so we need to fly further east to find him. What's our repair schedule? Yeah, half an hour and $10, and we can sell this cannon for 4,000. So we've actually gotten a decent amount of money so far because we captured a transport and sold off some gear. So we're paying for our stuff so far. What we would probably do from here is we would repair this force. We'd hit Kiriath because we're hoping that there's a character there who we can recruit, and that's one of the main ways you get more ships. The main force we have here with most of our stuff is buying the cheap fuel at Kush, and it will continue to push on. And I like using these little mobile strike groups outside of my main force to sort of hit multiple areas and give myself some situational awareness. Once you start worrying about enemy strike forces, you can detach things like the Shikure, and you can send out lots of air scouts to try and keep your situational awareness up because the idea is, above all, you want to find enemy strike groups before they find you, because they will mess you up. If all goes wrong, up here you have your missile control, so this toggles the missile types. You start the game automatically. You can't avoid starting with 2 KH-15N nuclear cruise missiles. I also have 2 A100N short-range interceptor nuclear missiles. MiG missile launch control, we won't be able to show it off this episode, but flick missiles to active. Designated target, so if I do this K-15s, I could pick Dan, I could click, then click launch, and lo and behold, you have started a nuclear war. So, that's a sample of HighFleet. I'm probably going to play a little more of this on the channel because the playthroughs don't go particularly long and I'm just enjoying it so damn much. But I really want to get back to editing up and posting my Dominions 5 and Phoenix Point content, so don't expect this to slow me down. I consider this a nice little optional extra, a commiseration for my editing mistake tonight. It's a little bit different, but if you're at all interested in this idea of cat and mouse strategic gameplay, economic management, playing around with ELINT and situational awareness and the dynamics that come from warfare where there's a very heavy fog of war effect. It's very difficult to detect and be detected, and once you are detected, standoff weapons are actually incredibly dangerous, so cruise missiles, aircraft, etc. Can make the battleships and cruisers of this particular world very, very vulnerable. If you find any of that interesting, stick with this series or consider taking a look at the game itself. I'm having fun with it, and it's really surprised me so far. Hope you're having a good time all. Cheers.